Hello, I'm Neil Mitchell from 3AW. You've got in your machine what I believe to be a significant piece of Australian history. Australia Remembers was an idea which came from the Federal Minister for Veterans Affairs, Con Shaka. He discussed it with several people, including me, months before it all began. I was proud and delighted to be a member of the Victorian Committee of Australian Remembers under the leadership of Mr Toni. Now, our aim through the year was to bring people together, to encourage returned servicemen to pass on their memories to the younger generation, to pass on the torch of freedom, and for Australia to say thank you. There were many, many events, including the concert at the Palais and, of course, the march through the city to commemorate VP Day. That march was one of the most emotional and important things I've ever seen happen in the streets of Melbourne. There were at least 200,000 people there, and the atmosphere was warm. It was a day of celebration, a day of gratitude, and a day of a few tears. With Australia Remembers, 3AW has put together this tape of highlights of our coverage of those few days, 50 years from the end of the war. I hope this will help people remember, even when the diggers are gone, because that basic message will be the same for the rest of our history, and the debt will be no less. That message is, thanks for the freedom.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia, Mr. J.B. Chifley.
Fellow citizens, the war is over. The Japanese government has accepted the terms of surrender imposed by the Allied nations, and hostilities will now cease. At this moment, let us offer thanks to God. Let us remember those whose lives were given that we may enjoy this glorious moment and may look forward to a peace which they have won for us. Let us remember those whose thoughts, with proud sorrow, turn towards gallant loved ones who will not come back. Australians will feel their happiness tinged with sorrow that another man who gave his all was not spared to be with us today. That man was John Curtin. We owe, too, a great debt to those men and women who performed miracles of production in secondary and primary industries so that the battle of supply could be won and a massive effort achieved. Australia's part comparatively, in terms of fighting forces and supplies, ranks high, and the Australian people may be justly proud of everything they have done. And now our men and women will come home. Our fighting men with battle honours thick upon them from every theatre of war. Australians stopped the Japanese in their drive south, just as they helped start the first march towards ultimate victory in North Africa. Australians fought in the battles of the air everywhere, and Australian seamen covered every ocean. Here in Australia there is much to be done. The Australian government, which stood steadfast during the dread days of the war, will give all that it has to working and planning to ensure that the peace will be a real thing. Let us join together in the march of our nation to future greatness. Good day to you, fellow citizens.
I think John's coming in to us.
He is too.
Come in, John. Good to see you.
How are you, mate?
Bruce and Phil.
John!
Phil, how are you?
Come
Which one's
round.
Bruce?
Over here.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm very well indeed, you guys. How are you?
Oh, that's great. Listen, thanks for coming along. And right up here in the gods to be with us tonight.
Well, I mean, you guys deserve to be right up here with the gods. You really do.
That's lovely.
No, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, good. What are you doing tonight, John?
I'm gonna...
Not having a date afterwards.
No, I'm just going to have a little sing. I'm doing one of my favourite songs. As Time Goes By.
Oh, lovely.
And I was just saying to Anthony Warlow and I were just standing backstage there, and I said singing these songs is really difficult sometimes because it's almost like singing the national anthem somewhere because you daren't forget the words because everybody knows these ones.
That's right.
So I'm a bit toey.
Yeah. Now, what about the band? I mean, that's a full, symphony orchestra would it be, John?
Oh, it's not symphony size. It's pretty big though. I mean, it can be difficult because if you blow it, you really blow it, and you blow it in front of a lot of people.
John, would you have played the Palais before?
I have, yes, Bruce, many years ago, and fairly often actually.
Yeah.
In the old days, yeah.
Good acoustics and good quality?
Well, it was never built for what we do. I mean, it was built for more acoustic music. Right. This is all electrified and you know, used with a PA and stuff. But it'll work. I mean, it'll be pulled together very well. They've got the best people doing it. So.
John, you've done some very prestigious special concerts over the last couple of years for Rwanda and so on, but this one would be something very unique for you and something very close to your heart, surely.
Yeah, Phil. Well, this has to be close to everyone's heart. I was talking to, again, down backstage, Lindsay Field, and Lindsay and I sing together often. That's right. And he's from New Zealand. I keep telling people that. It's a little excuse I have for him. But he said to me, I didn't realise how big this is, how important this is. And I said, look, I've got to tell you, nor did I. And I had some idea. It really is quite a celebration. And you know, I mean, I'm just glad that we're celebrating the fact that it's not on anymore. You know?
What, the show?
No, the war.
Coming from England...
You've been getting me for 20 years.
Coming from England yourself, during the war you would have had grandparents perhaps who were involved
yes,
in
absolutely.
fighting the enemy.
Yes, sir.
What are your memories of your grandparents, and what have they told you of London during the Blitz, for example?
Well, my parents were in London during the Blitz as well. Well, my father wasn't, my mother was. I mean, some horrific stories, and I don't think they ever really enjoyed talking about it. It was something that we as children had to ask for some reason. My sons ask my father now about, you know, his part in the war, and he doesn't particularly enjoy talking about it, but he'll tell them stories, and sometimes he lies a little bit, which is, you know, his right. But yeah, I have vivid memories of sitting down with my granddad and him telling me stories about, you know, his friends and some of the things that happened while they were away. Fortunately, they you know, they didn't tell us all the gory details. They tended to romanticise it a little, which was I don't know whether that was good or bad. I guess not real good, but for me it brightened my eyes and you know, brought me closer to my granddad, which was nice.
John, what are you singing tonight?
As Time Goes By,
Great.
beautiful old song.
You told us that earlier, but did you have any
Yeah, but
choice
Bruce must
in
have
the...
been listening, Phil.
I was just testing you, Phil, and thanks for bringing it up and saying that I questioned him earlier.
But did
Very
you
rude.
have any say into the material you're performing tonight, or did they say to you, hey, that's a song we want you to sing?
No, they were very kind. In fact, that they let me choose. Is Wheatley at the? Oh, he's
Here's
coming
Glenn
in.
Wheatley.
We're in trouble
we
now.
never had a talk to Glenn Wheatley.
The time chief.
Yes, I know. We're keeping him, aren't we?
Yes, you are. And it's 15:15. No, he's on very shortly.
You're looking well, Glenn.
Aren't I? For an old
No,
fella.
it's the lighting. It's the lighting. Honestly, I look better than he does. Honest.
No, I come up with a scrub.
Hello, Glenn. Philip Brady.
Oh,
I
Philip,
did
there you
audition.
are. Stand up.
I auditioned
Sorry.
for LRB, but I missed out, you might recall.
Sorry. Did you get the check that I sent you? Sorry.
Listen, how's Jill and the family, John?
Particularly well, mate. They're at home with some friends. Going to have a laugh at me on the TV tonight. See what happens.
Jill's mother often rings us on Nightline Phil, doesn't she?
Yeah, I know. I've got to talk to her about that.
She's doing a better job than him and me.
There are no secrets.
Actually,
Thanks for coming up.
Oh, that's my great pleasure. Phil,
Good on you, mate. Thank you, John.
I love you guys, and I
Yeah,
thank you
we
thanks
feel
for
the
asking
same.
me all the way up here in the gods. It's really
lovely
great.
of you to
It was
do
a nice walk, honest.
See you, Glenn. Thank you. Good.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
We had to sort of come up a very shaky ladder to get this bird's eye view of the palais.
We're in the what is called the paint frame, where the actual sets and backdrops are painted and then flown in. But flying in to be with us tonight is James Blundell, and we welcome you along, James, to your... And what are you going to do for us tonight?
It's a song called Tangerine. I'm trying to follow Mr. Bing Crosby, and it's not that easy.
Oh, well now, is it easy for you being in the country and western genre, James?
Well, it's funny. Musically, I'm more a three-chord blues-oriented kind of simplicity thing. So I love swing feels, but actually there's a lot of semitone modulation. So it's, oh my God, here we go.
Now, of course, you've written a lot of your own material over the years and won so many awards at Tamworth. Must be a bit different for you tonight to be standing surrounded by members of the armed services and the army band, and this will be quite unique, James, would it?
Absolutely, everything you say is true. I mean, it's like having a huge motor behind you with that many pieces playing, and I was like, oh, here we go. Like, you're not completely in control this evening.
James, it looks as though the floor manager is giving you the finger, and it looks as though Tangerine is about to be rehearsed down there centre stage.
Okay, thank
James,
you.
thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
Oh, here's Anthony Warlow down at all.
Anthony. Gee, we've just enjoyed your rehearsal. Bruce and Phil, you know us. You've been into the station before.
Anthony Warlow on Remember When. What are you doing tonight?
Tonight I'm singing I'll Be Seeing You and Night and Day.
Beautiful.
You are the one.
Thank you. Nothing evokes more memories than those 2 or 3 songs.
They're fantastic songs.
Because they were parting songs, weren't they?
Exactly
when lovers
right.
and friends
Very
might
moving.
not see each other again.
That's right. And the way that this is starting to set up tonight, it's one of the most wonderful things I've done. It's a fabulous concert.
What's it like standing out there centre stage, just looking at those 3 tiers right up to the cathedral?
I didn't notice anyone was crying. The theatre is beautiful. I had an opportunity to come and see Joan Sutherland in my first year of the Australian Opera here, but I didn't get a chance to actually work on the stage. I was up the other end of town at the Old Princess when it was before it was renovated, and it's a wonderful theatre to stand in, I have to say.
Now, as we can see now, the place is total darkness, but you wait in a moment when the back doors open up and they come streaming in their thousands, Phil. All these people in khaki, people who are from the air, from the armed forces, and the sea men.
The Army, Navy.
Here they are, they're coming in
Air
now.
Force.
The curtain is up, and here they come bursting in, these jitterbuggers making their way to the stage where there's an enormous seaman's hat and an army hat, and the medals hanging down from the background look fantastic. And here they come down the aisle onto the stage, about 200 airmen, seamen, and the wax as well. All dressed in the traditional 1940s outfit of the end of the war. I tell you what, who stole the show at the beginning of our show tonight? Toni Pearen, who sang Too Young or Too Old. She's with us now. Toni.
Hi.
How are you? You sounded great down there.
I'm coming down after the big song.
Yeah.
Yes.
How did it feel opening an event like this?
I was so nervous, racked with nerves. But did I look all right?
You look fabulous. You look beautiful. Would you have done much of this work before? I mean, you've done television, I know, but in a concert stage like this?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to do a lot of charity work and with an orchestra.
Oh,
I've been
good.
lucky enough to work a lot with orchestras.
Great.
But never with a crowd like this.
Yeah.
Never as... There's a lot of old people out there.
Yes.
I'm used to, like, young'uns.
So you'd go for the rock and roll, the kids, they'd know you.
Yeah.
Was it a different feel to it tonight?
Definitely.
Was it more quiet, perhaps, more receptive?
Oh, yeah. They wanted to sit back and hear you sing.
Yeah. Okay, very proud to introduce our very special friend. We just heard him performing. If you could just grab that microphone, let me just say 2 words. Slim Dusty, good evening.
Thank you very much. Very nice to be here.
Don't get around much anymore. Good old standard.
Beautiful songs. It's a lovely atmosphere here tonight, and bringing something back from the past. And I think we'll find a lot more beautiful old songs in doing so.
Slim with a big symphony-type orchestra and strings. Is that rare for Slim Dusty?
Well, basically the first time, and it felt very comfortable, really. Because I can remember that song way back in my teen days, so I just never forgot it.
Duke Ellington, isn't it? Duke Ellington song. Maybe you'll change your repertoire, Slim, and start doing songs from the war years.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Lovely speaking to our second guest, the country and western star,
James Blundell.
James Blundell, who says, I saw my king, my idol here tonight, Slim Dusty, which was lovely.
Oh, it's very nice of him.
Whole new breed of young people coming up there, Slim.
They are taking it into the future, and I must say, as far as I'm concerned, the Australian country scene, well, just about the most popular music in the country at the present time.
Yes.
And the young ones are taking it right into the future. They're all very proud Australians, and to me, it's a very healthy scene.
Slim Dusty, thank you very much for being part of our Australia Remembers concert. Nobody is more Australian than Slim, and a great honour to have you on Remember When.
Today's program is dedicated to the memories of war and peace. It's so important, I believe, to pass all this on to the younger generation because it's living history. We'll remember, we'll celebrate, we'll sing, we'll have a bit of fun, observe 2 minutes silence, hear the air raid siren which signals it. We'll report on the unveiling of the statue of Sir Edward Dunlop, a statue which had its very beginnings on this program. On the line now I have the man who will lead today's parade. I get the impression at times he doesn't like being out in front. His name is Ted Kenner. Exactly 50 years ago and 3 months, May 15, 1945, near Wewak, Papua New Guinea. Mr. Kenner was a private. His platoon was fighting the Japanese. They were pinned down by machine gun fire. Mr. Kenner stood in full view of the machine guns only 50 yards away, and he took them on with a Bren gun and a rifle. He was awarded the Victoria Cross.
his is the only living. He is the only living VC winner who is in Victoria and Victorian. Mr. Kenner, good morning.
Good morning, mate.
Does the memory fade for you at all, or does it get stronger?
I think the memory gets stronger as they go on, because there's that many, it doesn't make much difference. They're still there all the time.
What about that day? What happened that day? Is that still with you?
Yes, to a certain degree, yes, because, that brings in a lot of actually dead men, my mates and all the rest of it, so it has to come into bearing.
Do you remember what your emotion was at the time of it? Was the time for fear? Was it a sense of bravery? What was it?
No, it was just something that happened that, there was a job to do, and the only way you could do it was the way I done it, I think.
Did you think about what you were doing?
No, not a great deal, no.
Do you think about it now?
To a certain degree, yes. Every now and again it comes up.
And what is your feeling when it comes up now?
A lot of sadness and also a lot of happiness. It's more sadness when it does come up.
Sadness for mates who died?
That's right, yeah.
But on everything I've read about it, you should have died yourself that day, shouldn't you?
Well, that fella up there must have liked me a little bit because he had a lot to do with it.
When you went to war, did you have any idea what you were going to?
No, not at all, no. No, I don't think anyone can describe war or what to expect in war, because if you hadn't been there, well, you can't tell ones that hadn't been there. Like, for instance, when I went in, they told me about war and all the rest of it, but it was only a word. It's you can't tell them until you've been there.
What we're doing today is very important for the history of this country and the future of this country. And you're as you, I don't know you're very comfortable with it, but you're symbolic of what we're doing today. What is the message, do you think, that we need to leave, or you and the other veterans need to leave now for the younger generation of Australia? What do you tell them?
Oh, well, there's always been a hard thing for veterans or soldiers, and they never talk about war. But I think it has come the time when the younger generation, they want to know these things that happen. So we've got to try and explain to them a bit to let them kind of realise what's on.
So what is the one message you would sort of give to the kids today?
Love and let leave.
He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was a top man at his craft. But then his number came up and he was gone with a draft. He's in the army now, a blower reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B.
Last year when I was away on holidays, Sir Edward Dunlop died. Steve Price was standing in for me. He spoke to, I remember, Peter Nixon that morning on air, and out of that conversation came the idea of a memorial to Weary Dunlop. Peter Nixon, of course, former cabinet minister in the Fraser government, chairman of Southern Cross Broadcasting, the owners of 3AW, got together a committee. Now, unlike some committees, they achieved something. Public monies were raised, and I suppose part of that reaches culmination today when a statue is unveiled, and we'll be crossing down there as it happens. I think the Premier's doing it in the gardens just opposite the old Prince Henry's site. In the studio with me is the man responsible for that, sculptor Peter Corlett. Good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
Thanks for coming in. Tell me, and we still haven't, it still hasn't been unveiled. What were you trying to, what did you want us to achieve with the statue? What did you set out to achieve?
Well, the first thing I wanted to do was to honour the man, Weary Dunlop. But beyond that, I wanted to put up a memorial to all the doctors who served on the Thai-Burma Railway, and also to remember and to give a face to the qualities and values that Sir Weary represents to the community.
Did you ever meet him?
Yes, I did.
Mm.
I had dinner with him about 2 months before he died in April '93, and actually discussed with him the idea of doing a portrait of him.
And what was his reaction to that?
His reaction was positive.
Oh, that's good.
Humble, but positive. He was quietly sort of enthusiastic. Yeah.
I wonder whether you ever would have got him to sit still long enough, though. Even at that age, he was still fairly active.
He was active. No, he would have been a wonderful model.
Yeah.
He was very charismatic. Just to be near him was, you felt encompassed by his presence.
That's true. Now, what is it that does that? I mean, as an artist, do you know what it is that makes a person like that? Because I met him several times, interviewed him several times, obviously in his old age, but he still had that aura, I suppose.
Yeah, I think he truly cared about other people. And he was genuinely interested in you as an individual, which makes you feel very comfortable in anyone's presence, where they're really interested in you.
What did you try to capture of him then in the work, in the sculpture?
He always had a sparkle about him, and on meeting him, I was fascinated at the, art is always about playing contradictions against each other, and here was this aging man who had a sort of a weary, slow demeanour about him. But within that, there was this really lively psyche. He was sparkling. He was alive with living. And that's what captured my attention, first of all.
What would you hope that what the reaction will be as people wander through the gardens on a Sunday afternoon?
Oh, that they'll see him and they'll say, look, there's Weary, and it'll bring a warmth and a sense of belonging, and even in a nationalist sense of sort of, he was a great Australian, there he is. He was also an ordinary man. He had a family, he had loved ones himself.
How does the sculptor feel on the day of the unveiling when you get down there?
Oh, very nervous, a little bit overawed by it all. I understand it's going to be quite a ceremony.
It will be a good ceremony. I'm going to let you go because you've got to get down there, and we'll be reporting it live as it happens. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I've seen a lot of the Sisters of Swing over the past few weeks. They are on stage, the Andrews Sisters, I suppose, and a great act, great performance. Tell me about the style of the music. Why, it translates brilliantly, doesn't it?
It does. It's just the most wonderful style of music you could really think about, the harmonies, and it tells a story. It relates to so many people. It really does, young and old.
You can probably hear it at the moment. There's various types of swing music playing through the public speakers around the city. And is this do the Sisters of Swing live on after VP Day?
Oh, we certainly hope so, Neil. We very much. We don't want to die off like the Andrews sisters. Actually, there is one still alive. She's over 80 now, and that's me.
That's you.
That's me.
We're looking pretty good for being dead.
Oh, that's right. Yes, we are looking good for dead. But it's been a particularly wonderful time, Neil, this week for us, because when we're singing, we're actually reaching out and touching people who can remember, and we can see them singing along, and for us that's really special, so it's been a great time.
I was sitting in the crowd at Caulfield Racecourse on Saturday night when you were performing there, and there were a number of old guys around me, veterans, wearing badges, not medals, but their RSL badges. There was a tear in the eye too. You know, the memories really do hit them, and they're good memories, but they're just, there's the odd, really emotional moments, aren't there?
Yeah, I can imagine. I was watching a documentary last night on Channel 2 about the Kokoda Trail, and it's really touched me. And to think that I've actually had a part in these whole celebrations, it's just been absolutely marvellous. And I can only thank all those men and women who were out there fighting for us.
Yeah.
We can't imagine what it was like.
You're going to do a number for us, which is interesting without music.
Yes, we're going to try it a cappella today, Neil.
Terrific, go for it.
Right, we've decided to do Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy for you. He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was a top man at his craft. But then his number came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, a blower reveille. He's the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B. They made him blow a bugle for his Uncle Sam. It really brought him down because he couldn't jam. The captain seemed to understand, because the next day the cap went out and drafted a band. And now the company jumps when he plays reveille. He's the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B. A toot, a toot, a tootly attitude, he blows it eight to the bar. In boogie rhythm, he can't blow a note unless the bass and guitar is playing with him. He makes the company jump when he plays reveille. He's the boogie-woogie bugle boy of Company B.
Over a year ago, I copped the full treatment from the Minister for Veterans Affairs, Con Shaka, and we'd been fighting about some sort of silly thing, some political matter, and then he started to tell me about this idea to mark the anniversary of the end of the Second World War. It wasn't called Australia Remembers then. Con Shaka was so fired up about it and so passionate, I was very impressed. He was a politician with a good idea and getting fair income about it. Now, I've had several public and private discussions with the Minister since, and I know it's fair to say he's the driving force behind Australia Remembers. He's on the line now from Brisbane. Minister, good morning.
Thanks, Neil. Good morning. How are you?
I'm well. And now, look, what has it meant to you? Has it worked? Have we achieved it, do you think?
Mate, I think we have. I think we have achieved it, and I remember distinctly when I came to talk to you about it. In fact, you were one of the very first people that backed me on it. And it took a while sometimes, I've got to tell you, to be able to explain and try to get people's mind around it. But, you know, that fellow you just spoke to, Ted Kenner, now that to me is probably, fellas like him have probably been the highlight, meeting people like him for me. I mean, I was with him when we went to Borneo. I went to Mission Hill. He's one of the most humble people you'll ever find, and his interview with you, I heard part of it while I was waiting, is just typical Ted Kenner. And these are the sorts of guys that we're remembering today, and to have had the privilege to meet people like him and all the other thousands of veterans I've mixed with, I think has been something which I'll never forget. And I've got to say to you, the major focus always of this campaign this year was not only to thank the veterans, but to make the younger generation aware of what's happening. Yeah. And I think we've succeeded. Not completely. I think you never were going to succeed completely. But I think we've got somewhere there, Neil, and you see what's happening in Australia today. Every city in Australia is going to be celebrating and commemorating this day.
What is it, Con, that you want the younger people to get out of today? We know what the veterans want. We've talked about that a lot. What about the people who weren't there then?
Well, mate, what I'd like them to know is that, you know, it doesn't matter how hard they think things might be today, that it's nothing compared to the way it was 50 years ago, that generation of Australians lived and breathed war, went through enormous hardships. Now, we're not saying we want them to be the same. Of course we don't. But by them knowing what happened then, the hardships of their grandparents, in some cases their parents, the fact is that they might be a little bit happier with their lot today. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's achieved that. The other thing is that at the end of the day, Australians, I think, have been looking to find ways of being proud in their country so that they could display it. And I think today, what we're doing is we are actually looking at the heroes that this country still has. We didn't have to look too far. Here we had sort of hundreds of thousands of these heroes still amongst us, and we weren't taking all that much notice of them. And, you know, the other thing I want them to try to feel, if they can, which is what I've got out of this, is some semblance of that feeling of mateship and sort of good humour and respect for your fellow human being like our diggers had for each other. Yes. You know what I mean? If we can instill that in them, even a little bit of it, then I think we've succeeded.
Is there one moment over the past year or so that stands out to you?
Oh, mate, I've just had so many of them. There are 4,000 events. I think every one of them that I've attended, I've probably attended about 1,000 of them. Look, every one of them have had their moments. I mean, there probably are, but today I'm a little bit sort of choked up, and we're waiting for the big ceremony here. I'm a little bit worried because it's been raining this morning, and I can't tell you one. I mean, perhaps when all this is over, we'll sit down and I can then tell you 2 or 3 of the better ones, but the whole year's been fantastic. I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of it, I've got to tell you.
I'd agree with that. Well done. You've done a great job. Thank you for talking to us.
Thanks, Neil.
We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. And will you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that that when you saw me go, I was singing this song. We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
Oh, bravo. I wasn't going to join in with that trio. Dorothy Baker and
It was lovely.
accompanied by Patti Newton and Tony Barber.
We disembarked at Sydney without fuss or ceremony. There were no flags or cheering crowds. None was expected. We were just glad to be back in one piece. The train journey to Melbourne was the slowest of my experience. I have no illusions about war. To be exposed to the gunfire and battle conditions that we experienced was frightening enough, but I realize how lucky we were. We never endured anything like the carnage and conditions of trench warfare encountered by troops in World War I.
Commander Jarrett, you were in Tokyo Bay for 50 years ago today, weren't you?
Well, on the 3rd of September, I was there for the surrender. I was aboard the cruiser HMAS Hobart, and I remember it very well. It was a day we didn't ever think would come. We used to say to each other, "See you in Tokyo Bay," never ever thinking that we would be in Tokyo Bay. I'll never forget, at about the same time as the signing was going on aboard that great battleship, the Missouri, about 1,000 Fleet Air Arm fighter aircraft flew across Tokyo Bay, and all day long overhead, much higher up, the great silver B-29s roared overhead. And don't let anyone tell you that Fujiyama looked down upon the scene, as I've often heard it referred to. Actually, you couldn't see Fujiyama. It was covered in clouds, I think with shame.
Now, Dan, I'm told that you Americans had quite a bit of luck with our Australian women back in the war days.
Well, most of them didn't do as well as I did. I got a great one. She and I had our 50th last October.
Well, you did better than most people then. That's terrific.
What do you think it was? The different uniform, the extra dollars in the pocket or something?
All of the above.
All of the above.
We were here, and so many Australians weren't. We were kind of overwhelmed. When I first arrived in Australia in May of 1942, most of your fighting forces were still over in the Middle East or en route back, and there seemed to be very few Australian men around. It was easy picking in those days.
So, or would you call it a public service?
I think we provided a real service to the young Australian women because, we reminded them that there were men around someplace, and we certainly enjoyed it, and everybody was just wonderful. Even the men were wonderful. You hear an occasional story about some disagreements and things, but by and large, it was just a great experience. And I spent almost, after I was wounded up in New Guinea and evacuated to the Royal Melbourne Hospital, where I spent 3 months, I spent the rest of the war in Australia, in Sydney and Brisbane, and finally in Melbourne, where I spent the last 9 months before the end of the war.
Apart from the hospital, Dandy, what are your special memories of venues and places in Melbourne in those days?
Oh, I just remember it as a great, beautiful city. My wife and I had an apartment out on Queens Road, and I've been back a number of times and tried to find it. I think you're going to build a racetrack there, and I don't believe you're going to call it the Young Park, but, I'll come to the racetrack when you get it done. Automobile racetrack, I understand.
Yes, and it's nearly finished. Patti Newton, I think, has a question for you, Dan.
No, I was just going to ask, were you one of the ones to have these lovely seamed stockings in your pocket and always were able to give them to the ladies?
Well, I set up a real source of supply back in the United States just in case anybody ever asked me for...
And how did you go?
That was one of the requirements to be able to produce silk stockings. The best thing I did was to take flowers to my present wife's mother.
All right.
Whenever I had a date with my wife, I always arrived at her house with flowers for her mother.
Well, it is always good to get in with the family first, I think.
Absolutely. And my mother-in-law is still with us in the nursing home in Manly.
How did they feel about you taking their little girl home to the States?
I guess they didn't really realize the significance of it at the time, but as I look back on it, my wife was an only child, and for her to have left her home and her mother to come to the United States was really a big move. And I think her mother, has always missed her, has always been proud of her, has always been pleased with the good care that I've taken of her and that she's taken of me. But it's a real move. And I now, as an old guy with grandchildren of my own, I think I would have grave misgivings about my child moving off that far away.
Well, Dan, I think it's terrific that you've come back to Australia for the VP Day March.
I've been so pleased to have a chance to come back. After marching in that parade in August of 1945, for the last year I've been working to get a group of veterans together to bring them back to march in the parade in August of 1995. And the fact that I've done it, and we had the same kind of reaction in Brisbane as I knew we would, as we had in Melbourne 50 years ago, the warmness of the Australians toward the Americans is just the most heartwarming experience.
Well,
let me say, too, that just briefly, that we were up when the troops came in on the troop train in Townsville the other night, and we fell in line behind the old troops as they marched towards the Civic Center, and we carried our American flag, and the same kind of reaction from Townsville. Townsville was warm and friendly and great, and that's the way it's always been every time I've been here. But carrying that flag brings out the demonstration of affection between our two countries, which has meant so much to me as an individual.
Equally horrendous were the experiences of men involved in the European conflicts in World War II, particularly on the Eastern Front, where the German and Russian armies battered each other head-on with no quarter given. In the sub-zero temperatures, many men froze to death in their trenches.
VP Day to you, what does it mean, Jeff?
Well, I think it was a tremendous sense of relief, of course. The thing that I recollect most vividly about it, working in Ballarat at the time, this was in 1945, was we were given an embargo on the station not to broadcast the announcement that the war had ended, because the Prime Minister was going to announce it, you see. I think it was around about 9:20 in the morning, if I'm not mistaken. And we listened to the BBC and picked up the information that the war was over, sort of thing, and so we broadcasted, and to hell with the Prime Minister.
You broke the embargo?
Yes, quite a joy.
He wouldn't have been.
I don't think he heard about it, but he wouldn't have been impressed with it.
It's actually quite relevant that you have quite a bit of a legacy, don't you? In fact, you were a member of Junior Legacy.
Yes, my father was a serviceman in the First World War, and he died in 1925 when I was about 2, and it was due to the result of war injuries, and so I became a member of Ballarat's Junior Legacy somewhere in the 1930s. And it was a very good club, and it's a tremendous movement for which I have great admiration.
And your brother Warwick fought in New Guinea?
Yes, he was in a commando regiment in the Second World War in New Guinea. He had about 2 years up there. But yes, we have an association with wars in our family.
I know he only died about a year ago. Did he talk much about that time?
Yes, but always, and I think ex-servicemen do, they talk about the funny side of things and the odd things that happen, and they captured some place and rolled a grenade in and saw half a dozen bodies all go up in the air, sort of thing. You know, the amusing things that happen in wars. But they very rarely talk about the serious side of it.
What it was really like. Although I'm amazed.
They're coming out more,
yes,
I think, and doing it now. Yes.
In the lead up to today. Well, I think that they're realising that, it's only a few decades that there won't be anyone left to really tell us,
Yes, indeed. And I think also the Australian pent it up and don't let it show emotion type thing is starting to lessen, and we are becoming a little bit more emotional about describing things that affect us and happen to us.
During the early stages of the war in the Pacific, the Americans fought some bloody battles against fanatical Japanese soldiers at the peak of their military power. I have no doubts about the ferocity of those encounters. The Japanese also suffered terribly, although there has been little written from their point of view. When the tide of the battle turned against them, they were killed by their thousands. One such occasion was the American invasion of Okinawa. The Japanese refused to surrender. Almost the entire garrison of 110,000 died in a gallant but futile defense of the island.
Well, I couldn't visit the place that she was living at because it was against the law to fraternise or to go into a Japanese home. You could go into other establishments and they didn't mind that, but not into a private home.
So it basically all happened at this regimental aid post?
Yeah, so we just sort of spoke to each other each day and that sort of thing, and then sometimes we'd, if we got the chance, we might get a party of us together and we might go up the hills in a jeep or something like that, or out on the if it was warm weather, out on a boat on the inland sea, when we'd tow our passengers behind in a Japanese fishing boat, and if it looked like we're going to be sprung by the police or something, we'd throw him adrift.
Had you fallen in love with him by then, Sherry?
Oh, it's a long time after, yes.
And when did you realise that you wanted to come and live in Australia?
We went to that Hiroshima.
Yes.
And we met to that station. And we not took hand in hand, just we walked. And anyway, that MP come up and that grabbed me and put in that police, Japanese police station. And I'm in the jail. That's in one night.
Oh. And Gordon, you went back to Australia, didn't you, in I think a couple of years later?
Yeah, I came back at the end of 1946 because there's nothing I could do up there. I knew that as soon as I went out of the camp, if I was seen with Cherry, she was going to be in trouble again. So there was no hope, and I had thought about marriage, but they said that was impossible. You couldn't do it. It was against the law, and you couldn't do it. So I said, oh, well, I'll come home. And I decided to go back and do my matric. I thought, oh, well, I'll see what can happen when I get back to Australia. I had to take advantage of the rehab. They were actually funding my schooling while I was doing the matric. And I thought, oh, well, maybe things will be different and I might be able to eventually get it down to Australia. But,
so you hadn't given up?
Oh, no way.
My brother Joe and cousin Dick White were witnesses to Japanese brutality. Their tales substantiate the war diaries of Weary Dunlop, which paint a vivid picture of the atrocities and inhuman treatment. If Joe had claimed me into his battalion, as we had once planned, I would also have known the horror of the Japanese slave camps. I was indeed lucky to miss that experience.
Here come the ragged, bloody heroes, the 39th Infantry Battalion, the militiamen that held the Japs on the Kokoda track. They were all youngsters. They were ill-armed and certainly unprepared, but they were the only thing that stood between Port Moresby and 6,000 Japanese soldiers led by a general. And the Japs were well armed with mountain guns and everything. And these heroes held them.
Drive with Paul Barber.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us in this special program today and tomorrow when we broadcast to you from Townsville. Townsville, the garrison of the North, as it was called, as it, a sleepy population of over 30,000, grew by the end of the war to well over 100,000 Australian and American troops, so that it became a sort of departure lounge, if you like, for our soldiers fighting overseas, especially in the Pacific. Behind me you can hear the sounds of the VP tribute to Pacific countries. As several thousand veterans are surrounding me taking part in this Australia Remembers Pacific tribute, it's very hard to get a handle on what Townsville must have been like in the 40s, because today it's a bustling little tourist town of backpackers, retired tourists, locals with tough tan skin, sugarcane and iron ore. It literally has a pub on every corner, a busy port, and yacht marinas so big that everyone in Townsville must own a yacht. Yesterday we went to Magnetic Island, and as we swam and had prawns and Chardonnay at a cafe overlooking the ocean, it's hard to think that 50 years ago the Japanese made 3 unsuccessful bombing raids over Townsville and had plans that the invasion of Australia would start through Townsville. But I was looking at some figures published in the Weekend Australian of this weekend, and the figures express the reality of what price victory in the Pacific and in Europe was paid. 60 million lives were lost in World War II. Of those, 27,000 were Australian, 300,000 Americans, 400,000 Britons, 2 million Japanese, 4 million Germans, 25 million Russians and 15 million Chinese. And as the Australian pointed out, most of the dead were civilians. Sobering figures. So I suppose when someone like me, born at the end of the war, is standing in the sun in Townsville on today, having, as I said, experienced the peace and solitude of a place like Magnetic Island yesterday, and indeed the peace of Australia and New Zealand in my life over the past 50 years, all I can say to those of you and your families listening this afternoon who did fight in the war, and to those families listening who made the ultimate sacrifice, the loss of a loved one, all I can say to you from me and from others like me is thanks.
They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. But at the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
And now I'm with Keith Payne. Keith, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you too. Pleased to see you all the way from Melbourne.
Now, you won your VC in Vietnam, I know, but the significance of VP Day to someone like yourself?
Well, of course, I was born and bred here in the north, just north of Townsville here in Ingham, and I do remember the war years very well because, you know, the things that I remember are our isolation from the south, the people moving out of the north, and empty homes everywhere, and everybody going down south. And we ourselves stayed in the north through the whole of the period, especially the dark days of the Battle of the Coral Sea and everything like that, you know. And I think the great significance of today is to honour that generation of Australians that saved Australians, right, and the Allies, also to impress upon future generations of Australians their responsibility to this nation through their ancestors to the new generation. We have to care for this nation, and we pass the burden to them. Well, we were always apprehensive of that. My father did come home on leave when he came out of the island, his first trip up the island, and we cranked up the old T-model Ford because there was no petrol in those days, and we fired it on power kerosene and went up to Mount Fox and recce'd an area where the family was going to move once the Japs invaded. So, yeah, we were very conscious of imminent invasion along our coastline, and certainly we made every preparation for it, but we were determined to stay in the north, not go south.
One more thing I've noticed just in the couple of days we've been up here in Townsville, that the old diggers and so many of the women, of course, who served in transport areas and all that, they've all come back together. I expect there might be a lot more tears, or there's tears almost of rejoicing in a sense, isn't there? I mean, they're an extraordinary group of men and women that the likes we'll probably never see again in Australia.
I think they're absolutely delighted to, not only see each other, but to learn that each other's still alive after these 50 years. Yeah, I've seen some very emotional little reunions going on, fellas walking past and, hey, Shorty, is that you? You know, and all these sort of things. Great stuff, great stuff.
Keith, it's an absolute privilege to be talking to you. Thanks very much for your time.
Bye-bye now.
have the Prime Minister of Australia in the studio with us. He's been attending the ceremonies today here in Townsville, very moving ceremonies. Prime Minister, welcome, first of all.
Thank you, Paul. Good to be here.
Now, you've seen a couple of the moving ceremonies this morning. You've seen a lot of the VE ceremonies. You're going to see a lot more this week of the VP ceremonies. To Paul Keating, citizen, what does all this, what sort of impact does it have on you?
Oh, a very big impact. I've been very interested as Prime Minister to underwrite more fully the history of the Second World War in the Pacific, where the sovereignty of Australia was threatened and where it was saved. Before 1992, the 50th commemoration of the fall of Singapore, and then Kokoda and the Owen Stanley campaign, much of the history of Australia at war has been centred around the First World War, sort of some of the national identity being forged at Gallipoli, etc. But it was in the Second World War where Australia was saved, and we're now getting around at 1995, the 50th anniversary of VP Day, to tell that story.
Sort of right the wrong.
Yes, and well, just to let young Australians know that the place was under assault, that we could have lost it, and yet with our allies we fought back and won the day. So I think that's important. And the other thing is, of course, I became Prime Minister in December 1991. Just a month or so later was the 50th anniversary of the fall of Singapore. So in the period I've been Prime Minister has been, if you like, 50 years on the shadow of the whole of the Pacific campaign and the war. So you have a mind's eye picture of the time and the events and where they happened, and the sequence and the time between them. You know, so in these 4 years I've been able to, in a sense, put myself back into the 1942 to 45.
Tell me, do you have difficulty getting a handle on just how difficult things must have been for people up here in the north? I mean, coming from Melbourne and you from Sydney, you come up here and you suddenly realise, hang on, Townsville, they had 3 air raids, didn't come to anything. They thought that the Japanese would invade through this town. I mean, to be living here at that time and then to go and meeting all the diggers on Saturday night, it's extraordinary.
Well, I think that the Great Sea battles, of course, were decisive. That was the Coral Sea, where the Japanese fleet was turned around. They were heading, of course, at Port Moresby, and had they taken Port Moresby, would have made then unrelenting assaults upon the east coast of Australia, the northeast coast of Australia. And then, of course, we had the opportunity. They were then forced back to the north coast of Papua New Guinea and came over the Owen Stanleys, and that's where we fought them at Kokoda. The other great battle, of course, was the Battle of Midway, where really, in a somewhat fluky environment, the United States found the Japanese squadron and broke it up. And these were the two decisive events of the Sea War. So
a lot of it done by the deciphering here in Townsville.
Yes, it just didn't, and it's like the war in Europe. I mean, we nearly didn't win it.
Can I ask you this one, because you and I would be roughly the same generation, I would think. I know that my relatives, when they came back from the war, so we were growing up in the 50s and early 60s, were very loath to talk to me about it, say, Uncle, what happened in the war, and they didn't want to talk about it. What was the situation in the Keating family, and did you feel that same, do you know why they didn't want to talk about it?
Well, my father lost his brother on the death march from Sandakan in Borneo 2 months before the war ended. And they expected him home. In fact, they were organising the sort of party for him to come home, and then they got the telegram to say that he'd been killed by the Japanese on the death march from Sandakan to Ranau. He was the only one who was enlisted, and so it was always, in a sense, a pall hanging over my family, because he was the one who went away and he was the one who didn't come back.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
And last Saturday night, around at Kissing Point here in Townsville, we went to a veterans picnic and barbecue, and we came across some fantastic people, let me tell you. Among them, American ex-serviceman Kent Freeman. He came over to Townsville on a mission this week. He wanted to find an Australian soldier who had saved his life and the life of some of his mates more than 50 years ago. And here's his story.
In 1943, up on Mount Tambu in New Guinea, her husband took 11 of our wounded off of Mount Tambu down to the beach. He was an Aussie medic. He carried him down on his back. And a picture of him with one of our men on his back has been knocking around the regiment and the division ever since. And so about 2 years ago, I researched the story, put it together, wrote it and published it, and then I started looking because I knew then that we were going to come down here. I looked and found Mrs. Allen, got in correspondence with her, and made this trip. I wouldn't care if anything else happened. I met Mrs. Allen, who is the wife of my hero. And at some time before we go home on Wednesday, we're going to get together. They brought from the city of Ballarat this beautiful golden vase, and I am just like a kid with a Christmas toy. It's so beautiful. And these people, Les Allen Jr. and Mrs. Jean Allen, are now adopted family for me. They're such wonderful people that it has made World War II all worthwhile to meet these two people.
And Mrs. Allen, did you know that story about your husband, how he had helped save these people?
Oh, I have learned it over the years, yes. Yeah.
And well, he passed on a couple of years ago, did he? Or
12 years ago, 13 years ago.
Well, it must have been fantastic for you to meet these people when Kent came over.
Yes.
And what was Townsville like then, 50 years ago?
Well, I don't know. They had a blackout. We couldn't see anything. I stayed 2.5 months in Townsville in the hospital. I was evacuated from New Guinea and recuperated here. I had malaria and a few other things. And I got back to the division later. Well, the only thing I had to say is now, since I've returned, I was here in '88 and I'm here again. I've noticed that the cities have grown. They've changed everything except one thing, and that's the people. Yeah. They've never changed one bit. They're great.
Last night, during the parade and so forth, people kept saying to me, thank you. And it's my feeling that we have as much to thank you for, because you took us into your communities, into your homes, into your hearts, and we were a long ways from home, and it made it feel like home.
So what does it mean to the three of you, like coming back here in 1995?
What's the greatest thing I ever did.
Very emotional.
Very emotional. When I was in that parade and those people grabbed my hand and say, thanks for coming, I said, don't thank me, let me thank you. Yeah. People here seem more, they're down to earth, more friendly toward us than people at home. At home nowadays, war is, they don't believe there was a World War II.
No, they don't even know it.
Yeah. You can tell everyone there certainly was a war.
That's true, that's true.
Victory has been won and peace restored to the world.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm talking to you from the Townsville Mall, where peace has just been announced. That's the Mayor of Townsville and the citizens of Townsville you can hear in the background, reenacting how it did happen here in Townsville 50 years ago today. Arthur, how are you? Were you here 50 years ago?
Definitely.
Which was better?
Oh, this is better today because we're prepared for it today. We weren't prepared for it then. When the war was over, we had no shredders, we had no paper, so we couldn't have...
They had no really big ticky-take parade like this?
No, we might have had it later on in the week or something like that, but we just threw everything we could over the side,
What's your wife's name?
Ursula.
Ursula, how are you? Can you remember what it was like 50 years ago?
I'll never forget it. Never forget it.
Just tell me all about it.
I worked in the PMG up in the phonogram rooms, and when war was finished, I had to race downstairs onto the telegram counter and take all the telegrams from the soldiers saying war was over. Fantastic. Very sad. But this today, honestly, we never had the paper to throw.
Got much more paper here today, yeah.
Oh, of course.
Your husband said that too.
Well, we had to go and get toilet rolls out of the toilet, all the towels that you wipe your hands on.
Well, this is all free. The government's bung it on.
Ah, we're enjoying it because it's free.
Are you loving it?
Oh, absolutely.
What about your husband? Are you loving it? Are you loving it?
This today, more emotional today than it was then, really.
Is that right?
Well, yeah, see.
More emotional for you too?
Absolutely, yes. We didn't have time to get, emotional about it when it was all over. We had to work. I was made to finish my shift, 8-hour shift.
What, they sent you back to work?
Post office didn't close their doors, old fella. Only the shops. We had to stay on duty. And when it was all over, then we came out. They danced all day and they danced all night.
Terrific seeing the young school children and students today, isn't it?
Well, I suppose if they'd got here, we wouldn't have had them, would we?
Now, yesterday, when we spoke to the Prime Minister, he said he wanted young Australia to remember this day and World War II, what that was all about. Here's what he said.
I think the best that we can hope for with children as young as mine is for it to register with them, to know that it was a great event in the history of Australia, that Australia was saved by the courage of many young people at the time, and that those values of liberty and egalitarianism and democracy which resided in the hearts of those young Australians that fought in shorts at Kokoda, still out there today in the young Australians of this generation.
So following on what Paul Keating said yesterday, today we thought that we'd seek some opinions from students who are aged, well, around about 11 and 12. So we're talking to half a dozen students today in the mall here in Townsville from Mundingburra State School. Mundingburra.
Yes. My name's Naveen, and I think that because this is all happening, I'm glad that it's happening because the people have been in the war. It's a time for them to remember and have a great chance to meet new friends and just have a good time because it was so sad so many years ago.
What about you? What's your name?
My name's Patrick Birtles, and I think that I hope there's not another world war like the other two, and I think these ceremonies are really good because they give the veterans a chance to meet other people who have had the same experiences. And
that's good. Now, what's your name and what do you think of these ceremonies?
I'm Enid Foreman, and I think it's a chance for the kids school children to learn more about what happened.
Right. Who haven't I spoken to? What's your name?
I'm Stephen Finucane. I think that because Mundingburra played part in the war, it's a good time for all the veterans to come and celebrate.
What can you tell me about Mundingburra in the war? There were soldiers there, were there?
Yeah, there was a campsite out the back, and we were practicing all the bomb raids, and we had all these domes that we go into under the ground.
Now, where's Mundingburra in relation to Townsville? Whereabouts is it?
It's in the state of Mundingburra, near St Joseph's.
It's St Joseph's School, and it's on Ross River Road, and it's there across from Philip Leong's. Philip Leong's wasn't there, but Mundingburra was there way before Ross River Road, and because not many schools are usually on main roads, but the Mundingburra was built ages ago, 95 years ago.
And what's your name?
Sean McCarthy, and I think that the war was very tragic a long time ago, and I hope it never happens again, and that it's a good chance for people now to come out and have a good time when there's these celebrations and to see all the veterans and stuff.
What's your name?
Kate McDermott, and I think that it's great to see the people from the war, and
and it's great to see the war's over. As Stephen said, Munningborough used to be a war site kind of thing. There was 8 classrooms and a campsite, and I think it's great to see the people from the war.
All right, now when you grow up, do you hope that Australia's going to be at peace and you're going to try and make sure that it's a peaceful country?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, because since the war's happening, so many people died, and it's like you never want to happen again because you never know, it might be you who's dying, or only some of you person really close to you might die. So just hope it'll never happen again.
Would you ever go off and fight in a war if you had to?
Well, if it was for the country, I would actually, to defend my country and my family, yes.
What about over here? Would you go off and fight in a war if you had to?
Yes, I would, to help the country and sort of look after the world.
What about you? Would you?
Yeah, I'd do that. The same as Patrick said, I would fight for my country and just be happy that I've played a part in the war.
You're going to say something?
Yeah, because we got to keep people's freedom so that we can do things like we're doing now. Because if we didn't have this freedom, we'd be under the control of other countries.
And what about you? Are you going to try and look forward to a peaceful Australia when you grow up?
Yes, I think it's important that we don't fight anymore because so that our younger kids in the generation will learn to live peacefully.
Now, did any of you have grandparents or grandfathers or granduncles in the war?
I had a great-great-uncle. He was in the First World War and he lived to 105 and he just died a couple of weeks ago.
Well, that was sad. Was he a nice man?
Oh, I never actually met him because he lived in New Zealand.
All right, then, well, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Now, I've got to say this to you because we're talking to people in Melbourne. Can you spell Munningborough for me?
Munningborough.
Will General Wainwright and General Percival step forward and accompany me while I sign? Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed.
We're at the victory in the Pacific celebrations here in Townsville that took place this morning. Now, I'm standing with a guy called Jeff Caddies. Jeff, how are you?
Oh, I'm very, very happy today. This brings back a lot of memories.
Now, you were in Changi?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, we all went in Changi from Singapore. We all finished up there. That is where we got divided into working parties and went. I was there about 6 to 8 months.
Tough, harsh times.
Yes, and then we went from there to the Burma Railway. We were working there for 18 months, and then I finished up in Japan.
Did you get very sick during that period?
Yes, I had dysentery and all that sort of business. I wasn't 5 stone when I come back from overseas.
You were 5 stone?
Yes, just barely 5 stone.
How much had you lost?
About 9 stone or something like that.
So you lost half your body weight?
Yep, I did.
Did you think you were going to die?
Well, the poem, we always say to everybody there, we'll never get off this island. That's Singapore we're talking about, see? But we didn't know what was going to happen or anything.
How did you end up in Japan, and whereabouts in Japan did you end up?
Well, we left the railway and we went by boat to Osaka. We were working in a steel foundry there, and then we went from there to Nagasaki.
So you were still as prisoners of war?
Yes, yes.
Can you remember where you were on VP Day?
We were on the mountains outside of Nagasaki. We were up in the mountains there. We seen the atomic bomb. Didn't know what it was. All we seen was the big white mushroom.
You saw it all, and what did you think it was?
We didn't know what it was. We didn't know the war was over either.
I was going to say, how did they tell you that the war was over?
They didn't tell us. when all our bad guards, see, we had some terrible guards, they were all taken away from us, and some of the older fellows that was pretty good to us, they were put back at our camp as guards.
It must have been a horrible experience.
It was. Well, it was your mates, you had your mates, and you looked after your mates, you helped them right through, and everything.
Jeff, you're an absolute credit to yourself. Good on you.
Well, I hope so. This brings back a lot of memories.
Now, I've got to ask you one more thing too. Here we are in Townsville, 50 years on. We're alive, we're happy, all that sort of thing. How do you look back on those years that you spent in the Second World War, particularly in Changi?
You don't look back. You think of your mates, what's here with you, and the enjoyment you're getting.
Thanks for talking to us, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Often overlooked is the input of Australian women during World War II, and at the Veterans Picnic there at Kissing Point on Saturday night here in Townsville, we came upon half a dozen women who had all worked in Townsville during the war, and they hadn't seen each other for 50 years. I spoke first to Dot.
I was an orderly room sergeant in an anti-aircraft group, headquarters.
How long were you here for?
2 years.
Was it tough?
Oh, we loved it.
What did you like about all these men around, I suppose?
Oh, there were quite a few, I can tell you that.
All right, and what were you driving? What sort of truck?
Oh, I had about a 1 ton, it was a Dodge, I think, mine was.
And was it tough driving around here then, or what?
No, tougher than it is now.
And what was life like then, up here?
Oh, we had our fun, didn't we? Well, I mean, we worked hard.
Can you remember when the Japanese tried to bomb the place?
Yeah, but we didn't see very much of it.
I was going to say, were you scared then, or what?
Well, I don't think I was any more scared than anyone else. We were all scared. We thought it was the end of us.
Well, definitely. I mean, how do you look back on those days, 50 years ago?
Oh, it was fun. It was lovely. Not sorry I joined up by a long way.
Now, as I say, we're embarking on what used to be on the station a traditional whip around Australia to all the major capitals to find out how VP Day has been going. And up in Brisbane, well, Julie Flynn's left Canberra to go up to Brisbane because Brisbane was sort of more or less the centre of it all, I think.
There was the formal ceremony of commemoration, remembering the 40,000 plus Australians who died, who didn't get a chance to come home and live the rest of their lives. And there was one woman, talking of poignant moments, who stood opposite me. She was wearing sunglasses throughout the entire parade, and she cried from beginning to end. And I think there were lots of families who lost loved ones, and 50 years hasn't really made much difference. The pain is still obvious. And having been to some of those war cemeteries that the Prime Minister talked about today over the last few years, it is tragic to see how many young men died in those last couple of months of the war between VE Day and VJ Day.
Yes.
And, terrible, terrible pain and ache. I think it was Digger James who said today, a real chasm for the families left behind.
Julie Flynn there in Brisbane. Let's go to Sydney now, where also an equally impressive parade, I saw a bit of that on television, occurred too. Ian Craven's down there. Ian, tell us about your day.
A huge crowd. The police estimated around about 100,000, but I would suggest there would be more from my vantage point at the Sydney Town Hall. It was 10, 15 deep as far as the eye could see up and down George Street. They were all waving Australian flags. The ticker tape was coming out of the windows. Not as much as you'd like to see, because most of the office windows these days are sealed. It's only the old buildings where they managed to throw out the ticker tape. Some of the floats were extraordinary. They had World War II aircraft, numerous double-decker buses from the era. They even had an old Sydney tram, which, of course, in 1945 was very much a feature of the Sydney streets. Lots and lots of old diggers that I met in the street, and as Julie was just saying, that they were quite overwhelmed by the public response. Some of them were saying that really there was no official homecoming in Sydney after the war. A lot of the ex-servicemen returned through Sydney Heads, then went straight to the Randwick Racecourse where they were demobbed, and they were too busy trying to get back into civilian life and to celebrate, and they were very glad indeed that it's come around this time after 50 years.
John Hewitt's on the line from Canberra. John, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
What happened down there?
Well, it was a fairly low-key ceremony as far as that sort of thing normally goes at the War Memorial, because, of course, most of the dignitaries and, of course, the politicians were up north of here. They missed a great day, really. The weather here for Canberra this time of year, to have that sort of weather is just unbelievable. and it was great. The emphasis for the ceremony here was on youth. I'd say that just about every ACT school was represented, and the thing about it too, it was more than just a day off for these kids. They really knew why they were there, and they were thrilled to be part of the whole ceremony. They all laid wreaths, and they all sang that song, I Am Australian, at the same time.
John Hewitt from Canberra. Let's go now to Melbourne. And Shane Healy has been looking after things down there, because I heard him commentating on the parade with Neil Mitchell when they were pumping up the line here. Shane, how are you?
Good, Paul, thanks. Oh, well, certainly one of the highlights was the unveiling of the Weary Dunlop statue, and that, of course, is something that kicked off in the Mitchell program via Steve Price a number of months ago. It came to its finale today with, look, you'd be amazed at the crowd, about 10,000 people down there along St Kilda Road, spilling out in absolute huge numbers, and Jeff Kennett got up and made a wonderful speech about Weary, about his time in the POW camps, about his time on the Thai-Burma Railway, and then a lot also about his work after the war, Paul, where he worked so hard with the POWs and further with improving Australia-Asia relations. And it was interesting that Jeff Kennett didn't actually unveil the plaque himself. He called on Tom Uren,
yes,
Mrs Duffy, to try and involve the females in the work that they'd done in the theatres and the POW camps, and just picked out two young kids from the crowd. And it was a marvellously symbolic gesture, I thought. There was a couple of hymns and a wonderful playing of the national anthem to finish off. So that's what started it all. And then if you can just imagine, everyone spilled from there up north toward Flinders Street Station, where the march or the parade began just on midday with 2 minutes silence. Then we had an RAAF flyover with 4 planes. We had the church bells ringing for about 20 minutes. And look, I couldn't estimate how many people were involved in the march, but with the ticker tape and the clinker of a day, we had 21 degrees, our warmest Melbourne day in a quarter of a century. And look, the good judges are saying 200,000 people. The people, the journos who were around, say, when LBJ was out here a quarter of a century ago, I wasn't sure that it was that many. I thought somewhere in the 100 to 150,000 range, but it doesn't matter. Melburnians were out absolutely in force. 10,000 school children approximately, gave it a real sense of occasion. And I suppose the other thing that struck me was everyone who walked past me, I stood on the corner of Flinders Street and Swanson Walk there outside the station, everyone who marched past me had a smile on their face. And I've heard your previous people saying, yes, it is a day also to remember, and there will be sorrowful people on this day, and that's exactly right. But by gosh, the huge percentage today, Paul, were just in a mood for celebration and remembering how lucky we are. And look, it's a day I'll never, ever forget.
Launceston, what happened there today with VP celebrations?
Well, it's been the exact opposite to Brisbane and Sydney. There hasn't been exactly much celebration. It's been a very low-key affair, actually, and a very humble service it was, too. I think it's pretty well summed up by the Launceston RSL president, Peter Doyle, who said the experiences and sacrifices of that youthful generation of 50 years ago have probably influenced the world we live in today, and that the price of liberty is eternal negligence.
Natasha Fick is on the line from Perth now. Natasha, how are you?
Hello, Paul. Well, thank you.
Well, you're sort of halfway through it, I suppose, in a way, aren't you?
Yes, we started off this morning with a ceremony at dawn in Bunbury, about 2 hours south of Perth, with the Return Services League paying tribute to those who fought in the war down there. And the other interesting thing that happened here today was that the WA Army Museum was reopened in Fremantle, and what they did, they dropped 2,345 poppies from a plane, and they represented the West Australians who died during the war, so just a nice touch there.
Let's now go to Adelaide. Rod White has been waiting patiently on the line.
Yes, the post office tower and the town hall bells were tolling, and I think the most eerie thing was seeing that 2 minute silence at 11:30 our time to coincide with the rest of the nation, and the whole city, it was just the end of the parade, so you had the parade still in the main street, and it just all came to a stop as if somebody had taken a coloured photo. Everybody stood very still for those 2 minutes, and then they blew the air raid siren to signify a start, and then slowly it all wound up to full speed again, just like watching a movie start. So it was a very eerie thing to see, but yes, a very happy day and one to remember, I'm sure.
Rod White there in Adelaide. Let's go now to Darwin. Robin Smith is on the line. Robin, how are you?
Hello to Paul from a perfect Darwin evening.
Of course, we tend to forget sometimes with all the discussion about other cities and what happened in Townsville and Brisbane being the nerve centre and all of that, and the big parades in Sydney and Melbourne. Of course, it was Darwin which was physically affected by the war more than any other Australian city.
Absolutely correct. Bombing raids that went for 18 months, Paul.
Yes, and the rest of Australia scarcely knew about them.
That's right.
So I would imagine...
Tonight, though.
Eh?
They know tonight, though.
We're going back to our own parade up here in Townsville. Steve Price, come in. Hello.
I'm now up on the balcony of the Tattersalls Hotel, Paul, at the end of Flinders Street overlooking Townsville Harbour, and you can hear that pipe band has just gone past, and I can, from this vantage point, actually see right back up the street, and as we speak, the women that you spoke about so glowingly that made such an important part in the war up in this area are just going past us. The Rands and the women who serve with great distinction up here. It is a real party, carnival atmosphere out here in the street.
Within minutes, the church bells of Melbourne will start ringing. They'll ring for 20 minutes to recognise VP Day anniversary. And the parade begins, led by Victorian Police in period costume, followed by the Navy Band.
Everybody move back,
The crowd here at the intersection of Flinders Street and Swanson Street, probably 30, 40 deep on each side. Barely enough room for the marchers to walk through. Right up Swanson Street as I look, people from the edge of the road right through to the shop windows. As the Navy leads the parade through, the veterans are moving off from veterans and families, I should say, because this is a parade for the people. There are the bells, the church bells ringing over Melbourne. They'll ring for 20 minutes. As the Navy leads the parade through, the veterans are stepping off and their families from outside the Arts Centre. They're moving into this enormous funnel of people. From where I'm sitting, the crowd is gathered on the edge of the tram tracks in the middle of Swanson Street, and they're heading straight back to the steps of Flinders Street Station. School kids everywhere. You hear those church bells, it's extraordinary. It's one of the most amazing events I've been involved in. And the ticker tape is starting to come out of the buildings along Swanson Street as the Australian Army Band moves through the intersection and fly past veteran aircraft. Shane Healy, can you hear me down there?
Yes, I can, Neil, and it's just a stunning sight, I've got to say.
And the RAAF marching past now, that's the three services represented, followed up by the veterans.
When the planes came across, by gosh, did that stun a few people. Four in formation, and then one just behind them, and they're circling again a little higher overhead this time, just out virtually over the Yarra River.
There's things being waved out, windows, ticker tape coming down. Here comes the police band, gendarme, and the drums. Here comes a police mounted guard.
And Neil, not too far behind them, I think we can see the first of the diggers, and they're probably about 50 metres away from you now, just crossing at the beginning of the Flinders Street railway station and making their way down the hill. I can see Bruce Ruxton, Toni Bettison, and a whole group of old diggers now making their way down. You should be able to see them any moment.
This is one of the most important events in the history of this city, and we'll stay with it as the veterans come through. The Premier out in front, the Governor, Toni Bettison, as we said, from Australia Remembers, Bruce Ruxton.
Tom Uren there.
Tom Uren, of course, a veteran.
Neil,
Changi.
Neil, the lady on the far side is Mrs. Duffy, who was involved earlier with the unveiling of the Weary Dunlop plaque.
We've had the bands of the three forces march through, the police leading the parade in period uniform. Here come the jeeps carrying some veterans and some serving officers. They'll all be moving into Swanson Street, into the heart of Swanson Street, where the ticker tape parade will begin. This is an enormous crowd.
It's quite
extraordinary.
sensational.
People were cynical about this day. Some people, there are kids and adults, the ticker tape floating down now.
Yes, you can see it, Neil, as I look up to the north of Swanson Walk. A lot of ticker tape coming out now as the Dunlop family and those two jeeps you spoke of make their way up toward Flinders Lane. The nursing services are next up. And a humorous moment, Neil, one of those police horses just left a little mark for everybody to have to walk around right in the middle of the intersection.
Thank you very much, Shane. The ticker tape coming down out of the buildings now as the people enter that cavern, which is Swanson Street. A lot of kids out there marching.
And Neil, there are smiles on every face as they come past. The Australian Women's Army Service just making its way past you now, Neil.
This was a big part of what this parade was about too, Shane, to have the Women's Army Service, the Land Army, women who supported husbands who went to war, to get out there and march. Not just return servicemen, it's a people's march.
Gee whiz, it's just a mass of people now as I look back to the south and up over that hill from the Arts Centre. It's hard to estimate how many people are actually involved in the march, apart from how many are actually watching. I'd be thinking we'd be well up over the 60, 70, up to perhaps 80,000 watching, and I wouldn't like to think how many are involved in this parade.
It's a very important moment, and this sort of thing repeating all around Australia today. That 2-minute silence, I've never known anything like that. I don't think we've ever had anything like that. The city just stopped, everybody stopped, tram stopped, people stopped, no traffic. 2 minutes of total silence.
And it was
that in a crowd of maybe 60, 70,000 people.
Yeah, I'd say at least that, Neil. The Air Command of Southeast Asia making their way through at the moment. The Polish Ex-Servicemen's Association. I should just say too, again, how moving the unveiling of the statue of Sir Edward Weary Dunlop was earlier in the day. I reckon 5,000 or 10,000 people down there along St Kilda Road. And Jeff Kennett, the Premier, decided not to do the unveiling and invited Tom Uren, Mrs Duffy, to basically remember the women involved, and 2 young children out of the crowd. It really was one of the more moving moments I've ever seen.
This is another fly past. The ticker tape is just drifting down here right along the cavern of Swanson Walk, and it's drifting down into the middle of the intersection, jammed with people applauding, watching the veterans walk past, the veterans happily waving. It's a marvellous atmosphere here. Kids, wives, families, veterans. It is exactly what we wanted, really, for Australia to remember.
And found this beautiful letter written by Neville's brother to his parents on just finding out that their brother had died. And this is written from Southeast Asia Air Forces, RAF 99 Squadron on the 22nd of March 1945.
Yeah.
And he says, "Dear Mum and Dad, I don't really know how to start, and please God keep me to send it. As bad as I feel, I can only try to imagine how bad you two feel. Nothing, no dear God, nothing could have hit me so hard as when I stepped out of an aircraft just on dark after an operation and opened Dad's letter that a chap handed me and read unbelievingly about Nobby, who's his brother. That was 4 terrible hours ago. I know it's wrong, but ever since I have been asking why, dear God, why? How I got back to my room, I hardly remember, nor do I care. I'm still weeping. I still feel sick, strangely so. I suppose I'm now supposed to be a man. Tonight, I'm just a child. A child long ago. These tears that blur my eyes as I write, these tears that roll so easily over my cheeks are not tears that come easily. They burn as they leave my eyes and fall uncontrollably from a source which is too sacred to be just common tears. I cry not because of you, nor because of him alone. I cry tonight, as I have never done before, because of something which a pen, however good, can never explain. I want to talk to someone, but I have no one to talk to, no one. No one knows me. So I just find consolation, such as there is, in writing this to you two, the nearest and dearest thing that I know on this earth to him. Yes, I weep because of what I have lost, something which I can never again find nor replace. The only true link with my happy youthful past is broken. With this sacred link in my life is buried many secrets, many trusts, a world of happiness, things around which our whole world revolved as youth is now just a treasured memory which I can share with no one. For the past they spell happiness, For the present, a painful reality of how sincere those times were. For the future, a sacred memory, pray God, to be remembered forever. In my present state, all muddled, blurry-eyed, wet-eyed, I travel back again with him over the days long ago. With me he shall never die, and with him shall I walk forever the weary fields of the future, talking as we did, living as we did, sharing life in the silent years to come. Please forgive me of this, rather nonsensical, but it is how I feel tonight and how you must feel. Good night. God bless you all.